Alright, folks, I'm back. Sorry about that. I didn't realize time had stopped on the previous recording. I was just talking about Bugsy Siegel. Um, he's said to haunt two locations. The home on Linden Drive in Beverly Hills, where he was actually killed, uh, supposedly by mobsters. It was the home of his one of his girlfriends at the time, a famous actress by the name of Virginia Hill. A psychic who was brought in to investigate the house claimed that the image was the residual presence of Bugsy Siegel imprinted on the place in his last desperate moments before death. As the years have passed, Bugsy's ghostly energy here may have faded somewhat, but it has been suggested that his actual spirit may not rest in peace either. After Siegel was assassinated, the mob continued to support the Flamingo Hotel and eventually saw it grow and prosper. They poured millions of dollars into Las Vegas and it became the gambling mecca that Siegel envisioned in the early 1940s. And it is at the Flamingo where the spirit of Ben Siegel is said to reside today. So, yeah. Hold on, I'm actually looking for something. Here we go. The ghost of Thelma Todd still walks in Hollywood, or at least that's what the owners of a building on the Pacific Coast Highway have claimed for years. It was in this building where Todd's Roadside Rest Cafe was once located, and it is not far from the house where she met her mysterious end. This is a house where the ghostly elements of her demise are still repeated today. But what strange events what strange events have caused this glamorous ghost to linger behind in this world? You don't have to look far for this answer, for the strange death of Thelma Todd remains one of Hollywood's greatest unsolved mysteries. Monday, December 16th, 1935, on the hills above the Pacific Coast Highway between Santa Monica and Malibu stands a house belonging to movie director Roland West. Inside of the garage, a Packard convertible idles with its top down. The engine is running, filling the air with deadly exhaust fumes. In the front seat is sprawled a gorgeous blonde with tousled curly hair and an infectious smile, a face that could stop a passing train. Or at least that's how she had been described. On this Monday morning, though, she looks somewhat different. The blonde is face down in the seat of the Packard. Her blonde hair is matted and her skin is pale. A porcelain replacement tooth has been knocked out of her mouth and blood is spattered on her skin. Her evening gown and mink coat that she wears, as the gas drains from the engine of the automobile, it slowly steals away the life of the blonde. Finally, her heart stops and her lungs breathe no more. Thelma Todd, Hollywood's ice cream blonde and the queen of the zany comedies of Hal Roach, is dead. Thelma's body was discovered later that morning and the police were summoned at once. The coroner on the scene believed that she had died from choking on the exhaust fumes from the car. He also admitted that suicide was a possibility, but no note was discovered. She was found because she was late for her expected arrival at the Roach Studios, where she was starring with Laurel and Hardy in The Bohemian Girl. She'd been Stan Laurel's choice for the leading lady, but the film would have to be finished without her. Thelma's career ended with her death at the age of only 30. She was already a part of Hollywood history. Thelma was born on July 29, 1905 in Lawrence, Massachusetts. She was an exceptional student and did very well in school. She became a teacher after graduation and began entering beauty contests to help pay the rent. After winning a contest at the age of 20, she came to the attention of some Hollywood talent scouts who encouraged her to try her luck in California. She got lucky with Paramount Studios in 1925. She was placed under contract and started the studio's new acting school. A year later, she was awarded her first small part in the film Fascinating Youth, which starred Charles Buddy Rogers. Throughout 1927, Thelma was given small parts in other feature films like Rubber Heels with Ed Wynn and Nevada, a western starring Gary Cooper. Then Al Jolson spoke a few words on screen in The Jazz Singer, and the motion picture was changed forever. The industry went through a terrifying series of changes as the talkies, as they were called, became the new medium of choice. The old silent films are gone for good, and with them went some of the biggest stars of the era. The careers of screen legends like John Gilbert, Clara Bow, Norma Talmadge, and many others were suddenly over. They were forced into retirement when the public did not respond to the sound of their voices. For Thelma, the coming of sound motion pictures could not have occurred at a better time. She was now able to develop her wisecracking persona, and the demise of many screen veterans made room for newcomers and little knowns like Thelma. A new generation of screen stars was born. In 1929, Thelma came to Hal Roach, who featured her and comedy actress Zazu Pitts in a successful series of 2 reel comedies. A former director at S&A, Roach persuaded the Path Company to sponsor him in his own studios, and he soon emerged as a comedic talent. Envisioning hilarious situations and translating them to film, Roach concentrated more on story than slapstick, and audience loved him at the box office. His biggest stars became Laurel and Hardy, Charlie Chase, and Thelma Todd. She proved to be a real asset to Roach, not only appearing in her own films, but as a female foil to Stan and Ollie and others. In addition, Thelma also played major roles in films for other studios. They were mostly comedies in which she portrayed the sarcastic and wisecracking blonde that most suited her. She appeared in 2 different films with the Marx Brothers, Monkey Business and the classic Horse Feathers. Stan Laurel always wanted Thelma as the female lead in he and Hardy's films, but her personality didn't always mesh with the 2 comedians on screen. She and Laurel became close friends, and he often found work for her in other films when he wasn't working for Roach. He loved her body's sense of humor, and when she suffered from boyfriend problems, she always confided in Stan. By 1930, Zazu Pitts had moved on to other work, and Thelma was often joined on screen by Patsy Kelly. They were still going strong in 1935, and her professional career was filled with high spots. Unfortunately, the same could not always be said for her private life. She had been married for a short time to Pat DiCicco, and after her divorce became involved in a number of affairs. In 1931, she made a picture called Corsair, co-starring Chester Morris. It was directed by Roland West. He was married at that time to an actress named Jewel Carmen. But in true Hollywood fashion, he moved in with Thelma. Roland West was one of the most respected directors in Hollywood during the 20s and 30s. While his output of films was small, his work was very much appreciated by studios and audiences alike. His greatest successes came in 1926 with The Bat, an atmospheric thriller starring Jack Pickford and West's wife, Jewel Carmen. His visually astounding 1928 film, The Dove, won an Academy Award for art direction. In 1931, created one of the most extraordinary thrillers of the time, The Bat Whispers, with Chester Morris, and then filmed The Corsair. This second film led to the end of his marriage and his taking up with the cute blonde leading lady of the film, Thelma Todd. Together, Thelma and Wes opened up a business called Thelma Todd's Roadside Rest Cafe. Located under the Palisades along the Pacific Coast Highway, many of their famous friends began frequenting the place, and it became popular with actors and starstruck fans alike. They were also living quarters above the cafe, while Wes also maintained a grand house on Pasitana Road, nestled behind Sunset Boulevard at the point where it connects the Pacific Coast Highway. It was only a short climb via steps from the restaurant. One fateful afternoon, Thelma was visited at the cafe by none other than gangster Lucky Luciano. At that time, gangland activity was starting to appear in California. Hold on a moment. I need a drink. Starting to appear in California, moving west from places like New York and Chicago. Sorry. Bootlegging and drug trafficking had already begun in Hollywood, but by and large it remained untouched by underworld. However, by the mid-1930s, Luciano was making an attempt to penetrate California with his illegal gambling enterprise. He already had casinos all over the country, and was so much money flowing in and out of Hollywood, he was looking for a way to get a piece of the action. He was also on the lookout for establishments where he could place gambling parlors, and Thelma's Roadside Rest Cafe looked to be the perfect front. Lucia turned out to be very disappointed by his visit to the Roadside Rest, however. While he may have been one of the biggest gangsters of the time, Thelma Todd turned out to be as gutsy as the character she portrayed on screen. Luciano made her a generous offer, and in return he wanted to transform the upper floor of the cafe into a secret casino. All she had to do was to keep the business flowing by escorting her rich and famous friends upstairs to try their luck at the gambling tables. He promised that she would be well rewarded with a cut of the take. Thelma turned him down flat. Thelma's career continued to soar. In 1935, she appeared with Bing Crosby in the Paramount musical Two for Tonight, and in November she began working with Laurel and Hardy again in the feature-length musical The Bohemian Girl. This film was also based on an operetta, and Stan found an unusual part for Thelma to play. She appeared as a gypsy's daughter, wearing a black wig to cover her blonde curls. She continued to work on the film well into December, and by the 14th, when she was one of many guests at Hollywood Party, was still shooting scenes. The party was thrown by Ida Lupino, a relative newcomer to Hollywood, and had the makings of a blowout Hollywood event. The guest list was vast and unfortunately included Thelma's ex-husband, Pat DeSico. After a few drinks, Thelma and Pat exchanged some heated words which made Thelma drink even more. By the early morning hours of Sunday, she had downed more than her share of alcohol. Luckily, she had a driver to take her home. As she prepared to leave, Roland West, who was at the apartment over the cafe, received a phone call from theater owner Sid Grumman, saying that Thelma was a bit under the influence and was on her way home. Grumman suggested that West see her safely into bed sometime between the telephone call and Monday morning. Thelma Todd died in the garage of West's house on Pasatana Road. On the morning that she was found by her maid, Stan and Ruth Laurel received a Christmas card from Thelma. Her death stunned the Laurels and Hal Roach. Throughout the following week, gifts that Thelma had sent continued to arrive at the houses of friends, including Stan's, further adding to the shock and misery. 1 week later, on December 23rd, Thelma was laid to rest at Forest Lawn Cemetery. A huge crowd gathered to view the open casket in which she lay, with yellow roses. A short time later, Thelma's body was placed in the ground, forever silencing both the perky actress and the mystery of her death. The inquest into her death revealed more questions than answers. Many suggested that Thelma may have committed suicide. It was not an uncommon method for such an act, but then murders had been committed in some similar fashion. In addition, if she had killed herself, where had the blood on her face and clothing come from? To make matters more suspicious, an autopsy had revealed that Thelma had suffered a broken nose, several broken ribs, and enough bruises to suggest that she had been roughed up. This, combined with Thelma's successful career, seemed to rule out suicide. But if she had been murdered, who had killed her? Roland West seemed to be the likely suspect, and witnesses from the party, including Ida Lupino, testified to her state of mind when she left the event. All agreed that she had been drunker than usual, and Sid Grumman appeared to testify about his telephone call to West. Also, witnesses from the neighborhood told the court how they had seen Thelma, still in her evening gown and mink coat, screaming obscenities and kicking at the door of the apartment. So, if she was so drunk, how had she gotten from the apartment to the house on Pasatana Road? West was called to testify, and he admitted that instead of helping Thelma into bed on Sunday morning, he had locked the door to the apartment. He also confessed that they had gotten into a terrible fight over her intoxicated condition. However, he added a strange twist to the testimony. He stated that he had been awakened by his dog barking around 3:30 in the morning and was sure that he heard running water in the apartment. He assumed that Thelma had somehow gotten into the house. An examination of the door did reveal marks where it was apparently kicked. Police were baffled, though, as to how Thelma could have gotten inside when it was bolted shut on the other side. This made them even more suspicious of West. Someone raised the incredible theory that West had hired an actress to pretend to be Thelma, beating on the door while he was actually beating the real woman to death. The idea of the look-alike aside, West had a strong alibi against murder. Although his statement was contradictory, there was no evidence to tie him to the murder, and he was, by his own admission, the last person to speak with Thelma on Sunday morning, just short time before her death. And it just goes on, all these surprises and confusing testimony. But it's still like one of the biggest unsolved mysteries. Personally, I think that she may have been killed because of Roland West's ex-wife. I think she had something to do with it. I think she hired somebody to kill her, actually. And I wouldn't be surprised if that somebody did not work for Lucky Luciano, who was embarrassed by being turned down flat, publicly. So, yeah, it totally wouldn't surprise me. Although, Lucky, I don't know. Because, here's the thing. Lucky Luciano, a lot of those old-time gangsters, yeah, they were crooks. They were criminals. There was no doubt about that. But they also kind of had a sense of honor about them. And most of them wouldn't sit well with, killing a woman. Back then. It just was kind of unheard of. So, while it's a possibility, I don't know. But I definitely think the ex-wife had something to do with it. But the cafe is where ghostly events take place. Although they have complained at the house on Positano Road about sounds of a ghostly engine running when the space is actually empty. There's been phantom smells, not spells, like the smell of exhaust fumes when no car's present, and apparently Thelma herself has been seen numerous times at the site of the roadside rest, which is still there, it's just not the roadside rest anymore. But here for, she was without a doubt a gorgeous woman, by the way. So there she is. There's Thelma Todd with Chester Morris during the filming of Corsair. This guy wasn't really a celebrity in the sense of being an actor or what have you, but he was very well known in his time. He was a theater owner. His name was Ambrose Small. He was Canadian. He vanished on December 2nd, 1919. And his disappearance was sensational and mystifying, so much so that it made a permanent mark in North American history. The marvelous and controversial showman would have undoubtedly wanted it no other way. Ambrose Small was born in 1863, and at the age of 13 went to work in his father's modest establishment, Toronto's Warden Hotel. As he grew older, he began managing the hotel bar and booking entertainment for his customers. With these minor musical acts, he realized that show business was to be his life's work. In addition to working for his father, Small also took a part-time job as an usher at the Grand Theater. He slowly worked up the ranks to the assistant manager and then booking manager, arranging for forward and spicy melodramas for the venue. These programs met with such success, and Small began to prosper. He also began to buy interest in small theaters in and around Toronto. His ambition was to own the Grand Opera House, but his offers to buy it were frequently refused. This made him all the more anxious to own it, and he began to work ever harder to amass the necessary wealth. Small also began to acquire a couple of different reputations. One of them was a daring gambler. He was never afraid to bet huge sums on races, and while he always paid off when he lost, he was not above being involved in fixed races either. He managed to win $10,000 in one race that was said to be fixed, and not surprisingly, he was said to have been the one who fixed it. He started to gain a number of enemies in racing circles and his romantic life as well. The short but handsome Small, with his luxuriant walrus mustache and fancy clothes, was a notorious womanizer. He was often seen squiring young and beautiful women about town, especially the gorgeous showgirls who worked the local theaters. He left many a hopeful starlet feeling both used and disappointed when he moved on to another attractive lady. This is why it must have come as a great surprise when the rakish Small, just before his 40th birthday, suddenly married Teresa Small, the wealthy heiress to a brewing fortune. What did not come as a surprise, though, is when Small began to use Teresa's money to purchase scores of small theaters and to book the biggest name talent that he could find into them. Small finally had his fortune, and he finally realized his dream of owning the Grand Opera House. Within a few years, Small began to grow tired of his marriage and secured business life, and he began gambling and seeing women again. In order to conduct his affairs discreetly, he ordered that a secret room be constructed to adjoin his office at the Opera House. The room was fitted with heavy drapes to muffle sound, a deep oriental carpet, a well-stocked bar, and a gigantic bed with satin sheets and pillows. Many a beautiful young woman was willingly ravished in the clandestine chamber. As his fortunes grew, Small continued to make enemies. He made his prejudices well known to anyone who would listen, even strangers. He disliked children, Catholics, which was interesting considering that his wife was a devout Catholic, and the poor, and felt that giving anything away to a charity was foolish. His continued gambling didn't help most to like him either, but as he grew more and more daring with his wages, he began to win more and more. Small was able to keep informed of the races at every track in the United States and bet on most of them. He became more interested in wagering than in running his theatrical empire, which now included almost every theater in eastern Canada. He spent huge sums of money and treated his employees and business associates with disdain. Small placed much of his business dealings in the hands of his private secretary, John Doty, who was well aware of his employer's dark and secret habits. Doty, though, had secrets of his own. By the late 1910s, high life began to take its toll on Small. His hair had started to recede, and his face was always reddened by broken blood vessels, the result of too much drinking. While he was still gambling, his wages began to be tamed somewhat, and his womanizing was mostly confined to his longtime mistress, Clara Smith. He was also beginning to tire of the theater business and wanted out. In 1919, Small and Teresa began negotiating the sale of the small chain of theaters to a British-owned firm, Trans-Canada Theatres, which is big movies today. The deal was concluded on December 2nd, 1919, and the Smalls received a check for $1 million, with an additional $700,000 to be paid to them in installments over the next 5 years. The husband and wife endorsed the check and deposited it in their account at the Dominion Bank at 11:45 in the morning. That afternoon, Small told his lawyer, E.W.M. Flock, that he planned to inform his secretary, John Doty, that not only Doty had been retained by the new firm as a secretary and booking manager, but we'd see a substantial increase in salary. Attorney Flock saw Small again later that evening around 5:30 at the Grand Opera House. Small was in a fine mood, laughing and smoking cigars to celebrate the sale of the chain. He spent a few minutes with Small, but then left to catch a train. As he walked out of the front foyer of the Opera House and into a driving snowstorm, he looked backward and waved at the smiling Small. It was the last time he would ever see his client. A short time later, Small also left the Opera House, bundled up against the biting wind, cold, and snow. He made way to the corner of Adelaide and Yonge, ducking into the shelter of a newsstand operated by Ralph Savine. The newsstand owner knew Small well, as he habitually checked the racing results in the paper each day. Small always picked up the paper around 5:30 when it arrived by train. However, on this day the papers had not been delivered because the train had been delayed by a terrible snowstorm in New York. Savine said that Small cursed bitterly over the lack of the paper, which was something that he had never heard him do before. Small then trudged off into the snow, and as he made his way down the block, Savine saw his form fade away into the blowing storm. He was the last person to report speaking with Ambrose Small. Several days passed before anyone realized that Small had disappeared. His wife and friends were so used to his dalliances in gambling that they guessed he had simply gone out of town for a few days. They wanted to ignore his shortcomings so badly that they never dreamed he could have met with foul play. Once his disappearance became official, though, the authorities launched the biggest manhunt in Canadian history. Teresa Small offered a staggering $50,000 reward for information on her husband, inspiring every amateur sleuth and crackpot to join the hunt with the legitimate detectives already on the case. Meanwhile, the police were also seeking John Doty, who had coincidentally, it turned out, vanished on the same day as Ambrose Small. The authorities learned that Doty had not taken kindly to losing his position with Small, and before leaving town, he'd gone to the Dominion Bank and, using Small's key to his safety deposit box, had absconded with $100,000 in negotiable victory bonds. Doty was found 1 year later working in Portland, Oregon paper mill, under the name Charles B. Cooper. He was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison for the theft of the bonds, but was cleared of having anything to do with Small's disappearance. He didn't learn until his capture that he had never lost his job at all and would have received a much larger salary with the new company. As the hunt for Ambrose Small continued, many began to fear that the theater magnate had been murdered. A man named George Sousey, a publishing house employee, reported that he had seen Small being forced into a car on the evening of December 2nd. Also on that same night, a caretaker named Albert Elson insisted that he had seen 4 men burying something in a ravine just a short distance from Small's house. A cleaning woman, Mary Quigley, swore to police that she had seen a notice pinned to the wall in the Convent of Precious Blood located on St. Anthony Street, which requested prayers for the repose of the soul of Ambrose J. Small, several days before the public or the press knew that he had vanished. These turned out to be some of the best leads that police had, but they were among the hundreds that actually came in. The authorities conducted a painstaking search for the missing man. Every business in Toronto was searched, and all 6 cities where Small had theaters were scoured for clues. Toronto Bay was dredged several times, and the basement of the Small mansion on Glen Road was excavated. The search continued for years, and even as late as 1944, almost 30 years after his disappearance, investigators were still digging up the basement of the Grand Opera House, hoping to find Small's bones. They also tore up the floorboards and pried off wall panels in search. Years later, a second-hand story emerged that a local fruit vendor witnessed a man stuffing something down the theater's coal chute. The story was partially backed up by a stagehand who claimed some particularly pungent fumes belched out of the theater's chimney on the evening of December 3rd, 1919, the night after Small disappeared. Police reportedly cited the Grand's huge furnace for human remains, but without success. Teresa Small was interrogated several times about her husband's disappearance. She was convinced that he had been done in by one of the countless women he had been involved with over the years. She knew all about his affairs, but had ignored them for a long time. Finally, she had demanded that he stop seeing all of them, including the mistress Clara Smith. After Teresa discovered several obscene letters that Clara had written to Small, she placed the letters on the dining room table so that he would know that she had seen them. Small came upon the correspondence and destroyed it all, ensuring that his cheating days were over. This occurred in 1918, but Teresa did not know that her husband had continued seeing Smith up until the day he vanished. In fact, he had dinner with her on December 1st. The police concluded that Smith knew nothing of her lover's fate. By 1920, the case had become desperate, and the police had resorted to following ridiculous stories and what turned out to be frequent hoaxes. That same year, though, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the writer who created Sherlock Holmes, and he was known in England for helping the authorities with a number of seemingly unsolvable crimes, was touring the United States. A reporter asked him what he thought of the Small disappearance, and he admitted that he was intrigued and had been following the story in the papers. He was asked if he might help out with it, and Doyle agreed that if asked, he would consult on the case. Within days, newspapers in Canada and the United States were running headlines that they cried, "World's greatest detective to solve Small case," and Sherlock Holmes to reveal Toronto mystery. For some reason, though, Doyle was never asked to consult, and his interest in the case turned to other things. And while the famous author was never asked to look into the case, the authorities were desperate enough in 1926 to contact a Vienna criminologist named Dr. Maximilian Lengsner and to hire him to delve into the rapidly cooling affair. Lengsner claimed that he was able to use psychic thought processes to find the missing man. While he was put up to the finest Toronto hotel conducting seances and astral trips, he sent the police out to follow his divinations. digging up half the countryside and finding nothing. When the detectives complained, he replied that the police were clouding his vision and he would look more later. Public outcry sent Langston packing, and the police department was left with huge bills that he had run up on the official tab. After 1919, Ambrose Small was spotted in hundreds of places, from owning a hotel in South America to living it up in France with a girl on each arm and a champagne bottle gripped in each fist. A psychic envisioned him buried in the Toronto City dump. An old friend claimed to catch a glimpse of him on the street in London. The magician Harry Blackstone swore that he spotted Small gambling in a Mexican cantina. Regardless, the courts pronounced him officially dead in 1923. The case of Ambrose Small was officially closed in 1960, so he's been placed in the gone but not forgotten category. But even then, the police were still receiving and investigating letters purporting to disclose Small's burial location as late as 1965. Toronto police detectives inspected a possible gravesite in Rosedale Valley. By 1970, the story was reaching mythical proportions. The ghost of Ambrose Small was reported haunting one of his former properties, the Grand Theatre in London, Ontario, and is credited to have saved the theatre's most prominent architectural features from unintentional demolition. It is difficult to know how the Grand got its reputation for being haunted, but by the late 1940s, part of its heritage included the legend that Small Spirit walked the stage after every opening night. Toronto-born comedian Beatrice Lillie supposedly saw the ghost beckon to her during a May 1927 performance. In July of 1956, actor Sharman King saw a man standing at the foot of a stairway. When shown a photograph of Small, he identified him as the stranger. The most compelling argument for spiritual presence occurred on a summer evening in 1957 when Jay Campbell and a friend noticed a figure climbing a ladder up off stage. It really didn't look like a person, but from the waist up it was the form of a person, recalled Campbell, who later became a meteorologist for a local television station. It had an aura about it. It's possible that Campbell and his friend imagined it all, but it is unlikely they could have shared the same hallucination. By the 1970s, the Grand had documented enough ghostly visitations to prompt 2 seances on its stage during the summers of 1975 and 1976. While the medium in charge never contacted Small, he was told the answer to the millionaire's disappearance would be found in the theater's west wall. Unfortunately, this lead wasn't pursued during the Grand's 1977 renovation. West Wall was the only one left unexcavated. What really happened to the theater mogul remains anybody's guess, and the mystery of Ambrose Small will undoubtedly live on for many years to come. Alright, got less than a minute left, folks. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Tune in tomorrow night. Going to be an awesome show. We're going to do something a little bit different. Hopefully. We're going to try this. I haven't tried this in a while. We're going to try a call-in show. That's right. If you've got Skype, you can add Ghost Wolf J on Skype and call in to the show. Until then, my pack, my tribe, peace out.